Yeah.
Okay, it's 5:30. Call the meeting to order. I've been reviewing the tapes. Ask everybody to speak up as much as they can because we're kind of far away from the microphone. We wanna make it as easy as possible for people when they look at it. We'll start up with the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll use our virtual flag there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next we have approval of agenda. Can I have a motion?
I will.
All in favor? Approval of the March 18 minutes. Okay. Any questions, issues?
Very general. That's it. Very general, they get to subject details, so.
Okay, so can we have a motion on the minutes?
Motion already and second already.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, all right. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Public comments? Okay. Continuation of the review. Now, we ended up with, 2.4.
You ended at the executive sessions, when you went through the executive sessions, under 2.4.
Yep. So we're at 2.47. Board meeting notification. I guess the question that comes up most often is that we certainly follow the law. The law requires us to post 24 hours before the meeting. Many boards expand on that, try to post their meetings during the week prior to the meeting to give the public a weekend at least to figure out whether they should come to it or not, or they want to come to it or not. So, do we want to have some language in there to try to move everything back, not to compress Robin's work cycle, but to just move it back, all right, to give her as much time as she normally has, but to back it up. Yes, Robin?
What we have started doing now, that on Fridays, we post to the website a draft of the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Cause we give it to you all in board docs, so we have been placing on the website a draft agenda on Friday, so that the public has that. So they'll get a draft with the understanding that whatever changes today, so we're doing that now.
Excellent. Why don't we add some language to that?
Yeah, that should
Okay.
probably be memorialized, I would think.
Okay. So, 8.1. The draft agenda will be posted on the district website Friday before. Board meetings. Hello.
So that's pushing it back, I mean, what's written there is Wednesday or not, we can't go out.
No, this is for draft agenda. I think this stuff on under A is for the final draft. Or maybe these things would be included in the draft, but it could, it's everyone change.
Well, the changes between the draft and final,
Yeah.
usually relatively minor.
Yeah.
And, probably don't influence anybody's opinion about whether they want to come or not. So,
I'm talking time.
so hats off that you're already doing that, Robin, that's good.
So where are you adding, or where are you
Just
adding?
making like a one under A.
Under A, do A
Yeah,
one?
8.1,
8.1, and this is add draft.
Yeah.
draft agenda
Oh.
will be posted to the district website Friday before board meetings, just to codify what you're already doing.
Mm-hmm. So, am I understanding this correctly? The way it reads, it says that, executive assistant will distribute notice, blah, 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 agenda supporting materials no later than the Wednesday evening immediately prior to the Tuesday meeting.
It should be Thursday. We do
It
it
was Thursday
It was
and they
Thursday, but
scratched
they
it.
changed it to Wednesday, so
Yeah.
that makes it the Wednesday. So you would have things by Wednesday, you could post a draft Friday, and then the meeting would be Tuesday, and any
What-
changes would occur.
This didn't get updated, but they moved it back to Thursday because if agenda setting is Monday or Tuesday, the staff didn't have time. They're collecting stuff on Tuesday, Wednesday, so that way it goes back to board docs to you all on Thursday. And then I'm posting the draft agenda on Friday.
Okay.
So instead of you all getting it on Wednesday,
That's
because the
it.
staff, right, cause the staff didn't have enough time, you get it on Thursday.
Okay.
It comes to me on Thursday and I put it in board docs and you all get your information in board docs on Thursday as available, so.
Get the next meeting.
Well, it says basically the same thing, except they're saying Wednesday 5 p.m. Everything should be
Oh, yeah,
to you.
that's for everybody that's submitting anything to
Yeah.
her.
But I'm saying it should be,
That's the thing about,
yeah,
but the next step,
So both of those should say Thursday then.
yeah. Because usually they're spending Wednesday trying to collect and get the information, so if we're gonna keep it realistic, it's not coming on Wednesday.
Okay, B is pretty boilerplate. I suppose the 24 hours is to cover if it's a rush, is that correct?
Yeah, whatever gets changed, just like today, things get changed, added on or taken off.
Yeah.
So we adjusted, today we adjusted the agenda from what you all saw on Thursday or Friday. So, yes, the 24 hours to cover, but it was just, minor adjustments.
Okay. So we're okay on B? C?
See, I think that we have been making changes throughout where it said it, wherever referenced the law, I think we did an all-encompassing, local, state, and federal, blah, blah, blah. Law, cause it just says in accordance with South Carolina law, but obviously there's other,
South Carolina and
Okay.
or federal law?
yeah, federal, or you could just say other applicable local, state, I don't think there's any local stuff, but.
I'm missing a C.
Okay,
You don't have C?
no,
It's cause B was added in,
Oh,
and then C was.
Cause you're on the red, I wasn't on the red. Let me go back to the red.
Okay.
okay, board meeting agenda. Okay, A describes what's on the agenda, that seems pretty all-in-all.
Is it still 12 days?
Hmm.
No,
No, is it occurring 8 or 12 days before? Agenda
Eight
setting
usually.
is 8?
Yeah.
And does that seem to be working for everybody?
Well, currently you need, is it calendar or business days, that's first question.
Yeah.
Calendar.
Calendar? Alright, so right now we're running at 9, right? Monday before the Monday of the week before the meeting,
yeah,
we bring it to 9 calendar days before the meeting.
so you're somewhere,
What we ought to
sometimes
do-
between 8 and 12, it's depending.
Okay.
We probably ought to either change the policy to reflect what's happening or change what's happening to conform to the policy.
The policy says 8 right now, right? Somehow they thought this would make it 12.
No,
Does anybody know why?
That's gonna be hard, cause you think about it, it's always the Monday before the following Tuesday. So if you get into 12 days, you're getting into that week that also has a board meeting,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, sometimes we've had to do that due to vacation or whatever, but it seems like in general,
What about the 9? 8, 9.
yeah, I'd say it's 8 days ahead of the meeting, not 9. But
Should
I
we-
don't think you really, I mean, I just would say that the usual practice will be, I mean, it's gotta be flexible to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
We could make it a variation, like 8 to 10 days or something. Calendar days, like I
But
think
that
it's
might not
important
work
to say calendar.
too, I hate to say
Yeah.
that, because we might need to meet 12 days ahead or, do we have to,
well, if I take the items in red here, I take it to mean that if the board members and senior staff members are gonna get it no later than X amount of days prior to the board meeting, they'd have to get it right after the agenda setting meeting, correct?
Yeah, I was also gonna discuss that part because that's redundant to 7A. That's laid forth in 7A of when it's gonna be given, so it's that additional red that's there under 8B is basically the same thing as what 7A was trying to do.
So right now, we get a draft agenda, Monday, Sunday, Saturday, Friday, 4 days before the meeting.
Which is about 3 or 4 days after she gets the preliminary information,
Right.
right?
exactly,
And
So-
A up there proposing, or whoever, it was proposed to go to 12 and 11. So
I
it's like,
think 11 is unachievable because the draft doesn't exist 11 days before the meeting.
well, now, I'm saying that was proposing that it would exist 12 days before the meeting.
The question to me about this is how quickly after the agenda setting meeting is a draft agenda gonna be distributed
Right.
to the board members? Right
Right.
now, it's 4 days after the agenda setting meeting and 4 days before the meeting.
alright.
So you wanna make it
Okay.
6 days? If you made it Thursday, which would be agreed on, right?
Well, for the draft agenda, you don't need the supporting documents, all right? So the question is, if the draft agenda is known at approximately the end of the afternoon on a Monday, what prevents it from being distributed by Wednesday? Yep.
Sometimes the problem is that if we're doing agenda setting on Monday, staff gets it on Tuesday, the staff would, Dr. Berg will say, these are the things that the board was looking at. If I send that out to you on Tuesday afternoon and the staff says, hey, I don't have time to get that, or I can't do that, it gets changed again. And so we're changing the agenda, and then when the agenda is changed, depending on what day or what time you look at it, I'll take today for an example. The agenda got changed a couple of times, and depending on what time someone looked at it, the emails are, well, you didn't update board docs, you didn't do this. Well, because the draft agenda still was a draft agenda, wasn't a final agenda. So depending on how in each time that we change it, then now, we can put it in there as long as you understand that it's gonna change up until, it's gonna
Well,
change through Monday.
What I was gonna suggest around that is that we institute some kind of revision control,
Right.
all right? Where, if it's the fourth change to the draft, it's revision number 4.
Okay.
And the current revision is 4, right? Then everybody knows
That this
if
is the
they're
latest
looking
one.
at the right one again.
And
Because honestly, I think that if the superintendent and the officers approve an agenda at the agenda setting meeting, the staff can't walk in 2 days later and say, you gotta change it.
I agree with that, I totally agree.
It's their responsibility to comply with the directives of the staff,
Yeah.
of the officers and the superintendent.
If they're able to have time to get the information that we're requesting, that the board is requesting of them.
Yeah,
Because
but they don't have to deliver it until the meeting.
that's not what you all said.
What?
Y'all wanted to if we set an agenda on Monday, on Tuesday, staff gets it. You all want it in board docs on Thursday.
But you know, here's the other facet of that though. I don't think the staff gets surprised because Dr. Berg brings in the recommendations of the staff as to what to put on the agenda,
Right.
right? So I don't think
It's on
they're
our office and
terribly
stuff.
surprised
They're not,
with what comes out of the agenda setting
they're
meeting,
not,
because they've suggested those things.
yeah.
Not always.
And I was gonna say that, I don't think they are because most of the time, even when I'm around the office, I see them coming in, and I've seen Bonnie and them come in and say, hey, look here, this is what I wanna talk about, so and so, or Dr. Bird come, and I'm sure he may ask them, so I still don't think that, that's what we would agreed on, that it should be changed based upon, they say, well, they don't have enough time, well, present what you have, and let us know that, look at that, at the time of the presentation that you gave us, as much as you could, to come forward and show us that you've done that, so maybe we may revisit that, but
Yeah.
now, I think they need to come forward for what we've asked them at that time.
Here's what I'm after from my point of view, and I'm not trying to be unsympathetic to the workload of the staff, but the issuing of the draft agenda is for the members of the board to know as far in advance as possible as to what's gonna be discussed at the next meeting,
And that's fair.
okay? Because it is our meeting, and it is our agenda. So, I would suggest that we have a tighter, shorter time frame in between the agenda setting meeting and the first publication of the draft, just to the, members of the board, and then the superintendent can inform his staff any way he or she sees fit to inform them what's on the agenda. Make sense?
so far, I don't know.
So, on the, I don't know currently, on the draft that's submitted, does it say like last revised
I
date
just said
time?
draft, no.
Okay.
But I can
So
put
maybe
that, I can
we
put
could
that on
add that
there.
though,
Yeah.
that would help to clarify so there's not 500
Yeah.
emails going back and forth, why is it on there, well, it says when it was revised, so.
Yeah, that's easy.
And then also, to what Will was saying, I think that just as long as it's clear to the staff, you know, if we're making a request of them to submit a report or an update on something, and they understand, we just, I mean, even if they're not able to complete it, that we receive something, and then, you know, just because due to our meeting schedule, you know, we only meet at, you know, if we make it, seem as though they have to have a complete report, then it's just going to prolong information from getting to us, so.
That's, basically, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say, all right, you set draft agenda, just something basically general. You know, everybody's doing their research, then incrementally you come up with an update. And then every day, every other day, or whatever, and nobody's expecting that update to happen. You won't get the emails because they're not expecting the new changes to just appear because they have asked for that new change. It's gonna come when you get that update. And then when you get the next update, everything that happened in between then, and, you know, whatever the final time we agree that it should be, the last thing, it's the last thing, just certain amount of incremental updates. And the first thing is probably not gonna be anything that you can really hold fast to except what's generally gonna be there. Nothing, you know, you're not gonna get the work with it. But the first update, you might get half of the work. Then the next update, you might get everybody finally completed the information. That's my thought process on it.
What is the output?
Everybody's on the language.
What is the output of the agenda setting meeting?
Well, I know what you mean.
When you adopt the agenda at an agenda setting meeting, is it, this is what it might look like, or this is what it's gonna look like?
We try to adhere to that, but you can't always, it's, you know, somewhat fluid, it can change from that, it's not, you know,
And how often does that happen?
every time.
So,
And I'd also say, so if you're going, so the way this is written, so 8 days is the Monday before, I think that's pretty good, you just said, if you go to 12 days, now you switch the meeting to a Thursday.
I think that's
That's not good.
unrealistic.
Yeah, so I think 8 days is good. You gotta take out, I would say, so right now, the board officers and the superintendent are meeting. He meets with the superintendent's senior staff separately, which is fine, so they don't all have to be there. So the way this is written though, it says that the whole senior staff has to be there at the agenda setting. And then, I think it would be, in terms of a draft, I do think it would be helpful. I mean, we obviously all had different copies today. You and I couldn't even see what Joanne was seeing, it was strange.
Did you figure, I
Yeah,
sent
you
out an
said-
email saying that the
Yeah.
people who had
That's something that
iPads.
revision control would take care of.
Oh,
over,
okay.
you
So,
know.
so I think I think ideally the agenda with the documents should come to the board members, I think on Thursday evening, rather than Friday. But there's still a possibility that the agenda may be modified slightly from that up until, you know, the 24 hours.
Let me just ask my last question, I think. If the agenda is known to the officers on Monday, why need there be 3 days before the rest of the board finds out?
And you're gonna have probably more draft agendas.
I'm sorry?
There's probably gonna be more draft agendas. The more times you know, the earlier you
Yeah.
have it, there's gonna be more and more, I
that's
think.
that's my point. I mean,
Yeah.
it depends on what you're looking at when you get what
Right,
you get.
exactly.
So, I mean, if you wanna be up to speed with what everybody knows, what the officers know, then you need that draft agenda immediately or the next day. But you should also know that there will be more changes.
Of course,
Yeah.
because let's say there's 12 items on the agenda, right? And so there's a change to the draft, it's not all 12 items that are gonna change, it's one item or maybe 2 items. So you have some revision control. So you come out of the agenda setting meeting saying, all right, we know what the draft looks like, here it is, everybody, okay? If it changes, we'll tell you, and we'll tell you with a revision control, revision 1, 2, 3, 4. And that way, yeah, there's gonna be changes, that's for sure, but it's only 1 or 2 items at a time that's gonna change, not the other items that are on the agenda. So I would favor publication first thing Wednesday morning to the board.
I have a question.
Yes.
moving forward, even I'm listening to us talk about changes. Well, my question is, as officers, we meet and we sit and we set the agenda. One, why are there so much changes to the agenda? Two, and then also, who are approving the new agenda being moving forward? Is this an officer decision, or is it a chairman, the chairman and the superintendent? I mean, because the point of us meeting to set this agenda, then then anytime the agenda changes, I think maybe even all the officers should know about it. It should just be a single-handed person. But my question too is, why is it changing so much in that time frame, and who's making the changes? That I mean, because to me it defeats the purpose of having an agenda meeting, and then all of a sudden the agenda changes 2 or 3 times after the agenda's been set. That defeats the purpose. So I mean, those are things that need to be answered too, moving forward in changing of this policy. The agenda should not be changing that much, and if the agenda is changing, then who's making the changes? Who's authorizing the changes to be changed? Because I know, as an officer, I have never authorized anything or been knowledgeable of these agendas changing. I've seen them, but I have no knowledge of them.
Well, I think there's maybe 2 possible scenarios at play. Scenario 1 would be, the officer set the agenda, and the staff pushes back on the superintendent saying, I can't get this done in time. That causes a change. That's scenario 1, okay? Scenario 2 would be, the superintendent makes a commitment to the officers that, yeah, this will be on the agenda, and then the superintendent has to go and work with the staff to make it happen.
That's it. That's what I believe. That's it.
And then it's not a collaborative forum. Yeah.
But the more common thing that happens is something is kind of pushed forwards. For example, after our our interviews with the superintendents on Saturday, we now need to have a brief discussion in executive session so Rachel and Dick can get up to speed, and then we have to decide about the vetting that we're gonna do. That was discussed, and they wanted us to decide that on Tuesday.
Mhm.
So that's something, it's not because nobody was prepared or,
Yeah.
didn't wanna do it. And that's a much more common way, that something comes up, is that, it sort of needs a priority.
Right. But
and
I-
so
But
that's
back to
Right.
back
I
to
can
my
agree with
point,
that
that's
one.
one item.
Right.
That's one item. What about the 11 items that didn't change? That could be known.
So I think what I'm, sorry.
Yeah.
So I think kind of what I'm hearing here though is that, it's on the topic of revisions, so I think that maybe we should add a subpart to this that discusses revisions, what will be done, what protocol will take, and if there are going to be revisions, what's going to be the method of notification, and even approval of revisions, like substantial revisions require certain approvals, or things like that, but I think is there a subsection?
Somewhere.
David,
I know
did
there
you
was
have-
something.
I think there's
I don't think you can write a policy that's going to address your issues. Those are behavioral things that you have to get to the bottom of. I don't think you can write a policy for that kind of stuff. And it's been like this for years. There have been changes that flow in, like someone will object to something being an executive session, as John and I did, it has to get moved.
And that gets worked
And
out.
that's just the reality.
Yeah.
You can write a policy, but if it goes into the face of reality, it's not gonna work.
Yeah.
Um,
You're right. The earlier, using that as an example, the earlier that exception or issue is identified, the
Right.
better chance we have of getting it worked. So why delay the publication of the draft?
Well, I'm not,
Yeah,
I was just addressing.
I'm
yours.
agreeing
Okay.
with you, yeah. The process has to be worked separately, I think. So, I guess we gotta just decide how practical
practical
is.
approach.
What were you gonna say about me?
Have
I was
distribution
gonna
of the
say to
staff.
Will's thing, I think the changes either have to be supported or not by at least one officer, right, who, for the change, I think that's the policy. But I think that's already written in there, I'm not 100% sure.
Alright, so let's go back to it. Now, the first item is 12 days. Alright, well, I think everybody's agreed that that's not practical.
So we're gonna say 8 days?
8 days. Can we make it say 8 calendar days?
Is it 8 calendar days?
Okay. So they're gonna meet 8 calendar days before, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And above that, I think there was, to Dr. Glass's point, she had mentioned the part where it says in cooperation with the superintendent's senior staff, but that usually he consults them prior. Is that what you're talking
Prior
about?
or after, so, but they're
Yeah.
not in the room at the
Right,
same time,
so maybe we should change that
But the
language.
second sentence, well, I think it's okay, actually,
Okay.
reading
Well, he
it
has a
at the time.
question, Dave has a question.
I just gonna warn you, that's this superintendent's preference.
Right, yeah,
Yeah, I was just trying to
Next
say.
superintendent might want his staff in there,
Yes.
so he can
I
get it
was
all
trying to
taken
figure
care of
out.
right there. But this superintendent
yeah,
does not want senior staff. Previous superintendent brought the senior staff in because that way they knew, they
Right.
knew in real time what they were responsible
And you know
for.
what?
And that's how they ended
I
up
was just
working
trying to modify
problems
the
instead
language
of
so that
setting
it
the
was
agenda.
flexible.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother issue,
That's
but
another
I
thing.
just say,
Well,
And
if you
that was
change this wording,
I was trying to make it more flexible, not
yeah,
limit it.
I'm just pointing out that some superintendents are gonna wanna bring their
Yeah.
senior staff in, and some aren't, so if you make it flexible, it'll accommodate everybody.
In that context then, there's no need for language that says in cooperation with the superintendent's senior staff, because that implies a requirement that they be there. It's up to the superintendent, right? So if he wants to bring his staff in to support, so be
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
But the responsibility
It's
to
just
represent the
superintendent.
administration is rests with the superintendent, not with his staff.
So
Well,
we're
if we-
scratching that whole line?
If we take it out though, does it imply that they're, I don't want it to imply that they're not required. So that's why I was saying, I don't want to scratch it completely.
I think making flexibility be more, be
So-
more appropriate.
I was gonna say, the board officers and the superintendent with any necessary senior staff or any required senior staff, something like that, that just says, you know, basically leaves it open to them being invited at the superintendent's discretion.
Right. Because I think that would also stop some of that agenda setting and, you know, in the past, I'm not sure whether y'all experienced this much, recreating of agendas. I think in the past, I've had the senior staff meeting with y'all, with the officers, and I think that at that point in time, once we told them what we expecting them to have, I think that would eliminate him going back and forth and all those sidebar conversations. I think that would eliminate some of that.
I think though that we're not trying to solve the problem of why there's so many changes. We're trying to solve the problem of how to deal with the changes and keep the board informed as early as possible. That's the extent of the discussion right now, because the reasons for changes cannot enter into the policy.
Well,
So therefore,
right, I
we'll move
understand
on.
that. I understand that, but don't be disrespectful now, however.
I'm not being
Right,
disrespectful, like a
right,
presiding
right.
officer.
And I'm
just
telling you, you can
what
preside,
to do.
preside tactfully. And now I'm telling you what I am saying, I wanna make this clearly, on record, that I just told you something that I think that when you take upon changing each and every instrument of these policies and procedures, then you have to get to the root and cause of it along the way as well. And that was my reasoning and logic of saying what I said, whether you took a hold to it or not. Thank you, moving forward.
All right,
Rachel, what
So
was
we
the
got-
wording that you added?
Well, I was trying to get flexible with everybody, and also it refers to the senior staff in the next sentence, so I just wanted to get it consistent throughout. Should we say, and at the discretion of the superintendent, any necessary senior staff?
Or it could be also at
At
the,
the
discretion of the board too.
The board and the superintendent?
And/or.
And/or,
Yeah.
okay. But yeah, I think that leaves it.
yeah, to me it's a given, but.
Because if we wanna request
language
something-
in
Yeah,
there.
or you could just say the board officers and the superintendent meet, and then, you know, then, I mean, the super staff can come too, it's a
I
public
just didn't want
meeting.
I didn't want the next superintendent or anybody in the
Right.
future, if some layperson picks this up and reads it,
Yeah,
they don't necessarily know that the senior staff is invited, you
Right.
know? So, or not
Okay.
necessarily invited, but invitation
Yeah,
only
exactly.
type thing. yeah, at the discretion of the board, officers and the superintendent, any senior staff. And then that also should be in the second, similar language into the second sentence, cause it mentions them again.
Okay, so how about if we have the board officers and the superintendent shall prepare the agenda for each regular meeting. At the discretion of the board or the superintendent, any additional personnel resources that are required to conduct the meeting will be in attendance. Okay, I just don't want, I prefer not to have language that implies in any way that the senior staff presence is required at the meeting.
Right,
Yeah, yeah.
right, and
That-
because
yeah.
invitation
That
of the board or the
language, that
superintendent.
language definitely has to be corrected from what it says there.
So how
Yeah.
about if we take out in cooperation with the superintendent senior staff, all right, and then add a sentence that says at the discretion of the board and or the superintendent, any additional staff members required for that particular meeting will be attended. To me, it's superfluous, but if we wanna have that language, fine.
I don't know how you write the language, but what I read here is that senior staff have an integral part in setting the agenda.
Well, that's
When I read that,
because
sentence that's there.
the superintendent represents the senior staff. That's
No.
my take on it.
Well, no, it says and superintendent, senior staff, not just the superintendent. If that was the case, then you need to scratch that whole line. So what it says and superintendent, senior staff.
I mean, a new
They shall
superintendent's
meet,
probably
they
gonna
shall
want
meet,
their
they're not
senior
just-
staff there
yeah.
unless they've talked to them before, just like to David's comment about how previous superintendents brought them in and then, now,
Right.
so
That-
they're
that
gonna
would
operate
speak to
differently,
John's
but
point.
this document hopefully is going to operate through many of them.
That's John's point, to how they should operate, but I'm saying what's written there implies that they should be there all the time and help set the agenda.
The way it's currently written,
Right.
yeah, I agree.
They let it come, they let it come whenever John got around to it.
Have you come to a resting spot on that?
Yeah.
Because something, Tina mentioned should also be worked in here, it's now a public meeting. When this was written, they weren't public meetings, so
Mhm.
you're gonna have to somehow get that in here. But it's now a public meeting.
Okay.
I think that's,
Yeah, 'cause when this was done, they weren't public meetings.
Okay,
They were-
All right.
They were agenda meetings.
let's try this. The board officers and the superintendent shall prepare the agenda for each regular meeting. The agenda setting meetings are public, okay? As such, any staff members requested by the superintendent will be welcome to participate with the board, with the officers and the superintendent. But they're not peers, and they're not equal partners in preparing the agenda. They're there to provide information to the people who make the decision about what's on the agenda. They can't be making the decision themselves, I think.
going to the notice thing, I think that should be a separate subpart. Cause it is pretty much on a lot of others, so just to be consistent with how the manual's written, I think it should either be,
A B and
I
move
think
it.
it should be either A or B, regarding the notice aspect of it.
Make it a B and then move the B down to a C,
I think so,
or, and so forth.
cause that's how it is throughout in other areas where it talks about notices and in compliance with blah, 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 blah. I think we probably have some standard language that was used somewhere else that we can maybe literally copy.
All right, do we need to say the meeting shall be public, as defined by the
Yeah,
South
well,
Carolina Freedom of Information Act?
no, I think, if we say here regarding the executive, assistant shall provide notice of board meetings to the public in accordance with South Carolina law, and we change that to include, other applicable laws,
Mm-hmm.
under board meeting notification, we can literally probably take that and put it here with regard to the meeting, the agenda setting meeting,
Mm-hmm.
just change the language.
All right. So, we'll try it again. The board officers of the superintendent shall prepare the agenda for each regular meeting. The meetings will be public in accordance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act.
I thought that was gonna be a
No.
separate and that's gonna be a separate heading, so that sentence won't be incorporated in that statement, is
Yeah, I
what Rachel was saying.
What I was saying was, we have A, which
Oh,
was
A,
seven,
okay,
and then
alright.
B would have the notice language
Correct.
that is similar to here.
Alright, so B is gonna become C then, actually, right?
Yeah,
Just
so
move
current
on
B
down.
will be C. Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's,
Alright.
I just think that's
Got
to
it.
maintain consistency.
Alright. So now we're still not through with C.
With that.
Can I pose something?
Hmm?
Can I pose a, to go
Sure,
along to what
yeah,
you said?
please do.
Okay, so so the board officers of the superintendent shall prepare the agenda for each regular meeting.
Mm-hmm.
The board officer, at the discretion of the board officers and or the superintendent, the superintendent's senior staff may
Be asked to attend.
be asked to attend the
Or
agenda
provide
setting.
input.
Yeah. But I
How
think-
about the appropriate member of the senior staff? You don't have to haul the whole senior staff in to have a group
Yeah, I should say
discussion that's
a-
outside of the
okay.
discipline.
John, I think you think you're getting too specific, just keep it
No,
broad.
the words are extremely important, like, that's why I said may, and I emphasize may, because sometimes
Right.
shall is too, and if you say the instead of a.
No, when I said word as in the senior staff in itself, I mean, once again, we're still saying that, hey, the senior staff, the new superintendent can't bring in his senior staff. If he wants to bring his senior staff in, I know, but what he said, John specifically saying as in a specific person from the senior staff coming in. I don't wanna say a specific person, if the superintendent wants to meet with his senior staff and the board administrator, the senior board officers, then that's not a problem. But to say that, we have people say, well, look here, you need, for instance, you need HR, and only HR need to come. Nah, we don't need to tell them that only HR is welcome.
I don't think that was the intent, though.
Yeah, it was his intent, it was his intent.
My suggestion would be just to forget the whole senior staff thing.
There you go.
They can be there, I mean, the superintendent can invite them there, they don't have to be there. I would just leave the senior staff thing out of it.
You
And
guys
make it
comment, I need y'all
broader
call on it.
and Simpler. Yeah, so
I
just
think
say
there's
like
no
we have-
sense having the CFO participating in an HR issue.
Right, just leave them, so, and it's public, so they can be there.
It's public.
Okay.
Somewhere you make a statement that it's public,
And
he
that's,
brings who he
covers
wants to
everything,
bring to
exactly.
support his,
It's not our business how he manages
right,
his staff.
how he manages it, right?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we need to strike senior staff stuff throughout, and if they're not.
just forget the whole second sentence there, right? Well, the word, you don't have to have the second thing, it says. You
Census of
struck
public
in cooperation with
meetings.
the superintendent, senior staff, it said the board officers and the superintendent shall prepare the agenda for each regular meeting.
Yeah, but that
And then-
means,
Will, you wanna let her finish,
Oh.
please?
Okay, so then, and then you're gonna say that and they'll, you can then say that
that would mean that
they will set the agenda 8 calendar days before each regular meeting. The date and time of the meeting may be altered as schedules require.
And that's it.
And then the next thing we have to decide is, this is where the agenda and the documents, right? Or this is, provided to the board, and we wanted to have that on, originally it was no later than Thursday evening. And then it was changed up to Wednesday, then it was
And that's
changed
back
to
to
Friday.
Thursday.
Yeah, that's why I said
Now it's back to
that part.
Thursday.
Okay, Thursday.
All that red there is, I believe, referenced in some capacity in 7A, under board meetings.
but if we scratch out all the senior staff members, members, then that mean that when they come, then if you're not an officer, then that means you don't speak. And so how would we, when they speak at the 3 minutes at the beginning, how would we engage them to speak? Because, we've had board members on this board that say, well, look at, if you're not an officer or certain staff, that you shouldn't be speaking in those meetings.
The senior staff is there to support the superintendent in his managerial inputs.
That's understandable.
So, if he's got a question that he wants them to answer, he asks them. Simple. If he doesn't ask them, they don't have to say anything.
I just wanna make sure that that's how it's gonna be, cause I don't want it to say, well, I came in, I pointed out, and y'all are doing this, and y'all allowing, I wanna make sure that we got a clear understanding while we change this policy on how it's gonna work. Because see, I don't believe in playing offense, I mean defense, I play offense. So therefore, I just wanna make sure that we have a clear understanding on that now, if we're taking that language out.
Well, we,
Oh, cause he comes in and he makes
Right.
a lot
I
of
think by
judgment.
taking we can ask our attorney, that by taking out I think it gives you more flexibility if you remove the superintendent, senior staff, that doesn't disallow them,
Right.
it just,
He just talks to,
right, he talks to
yeah,
them,
they
or,
don't talk to us about the agenda. He talks to his senior staff about what he wants on the
yeah, exactly, or
agenda.
one of us
It's
wants
very
to ask him a
back and
question.
forth with
Or
senior
you
staff.
support them.
They don't get
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah.
The way this is
Yeah.
written, they can get involved in all of it.
Yeah.
Rachel?
Now, just to that point about taking it out or whatnot, and I know it's totally discretionary and up to what they want to do, but as a board member, I would be concerned if there were not senior staff there for him to consult. If we are, for the first time, presenting something that we would like to have set on the agenda, and yet he doesn't have someone there that he can ask right away. I don't know if we're delaying the timetable. I'm all about like getting things done, so, but.
On the same topic, Dr. Berg told me he had never seen agenda setting meetings with the entire with the senior staff, like that's the way that Dr. Moss liked to do it. So Dr. Berg really thought it was more efficient to not have a whole group there, plus then they, if they're with you, they're not doing their other, duties. So that's why he really didn't feel it was necessary. If he needed to ask him or something, the next day he'd ask him or whatever it was. It didn't have to be instantaneous at the meeting. Yeah.
Because in my mind, the question is who sets the agenda from the administrative standpoint? It's the superintendent.
Exactly.
So when he comes there, he's got an idea of what he wants there. If he had done some homework and background work, then fine. But he can't be setting it there. He can't be setting the mindset
Right.
there at the meeting. That's the way I look at it. I mean, I'm just wrong.
Well,
And
Yeah.
the history actually started with Valerie, and when they set the agenda, Valerie invited the senior staff, and the mindset was set at the time. So when she did it with the board officers and senior staff, because as you're discussing, these are the things that we would like to present. The board was saying, these are the things that we were getting from the board. So everyone was getting the information at the same time, and then they were collaborating, saying whether they could do it or not, if that, this is the kind of information we could provide, this is about the amount of time it was gonna take. So originally, when this policy was written, it was written under that kind of auspice of how the things were set.
Understandable.
So,
If you're about
superintendents
efficiency,
change whatever
Yeah.
it is.
I think the superintendent got to become more efficient, in my mind. I mean, the more big meetings we have, the less things we get done.
Yeah.
Here's the other part of it, that I know we're talking about the superintendent inviting the senior staff.
Yeah, but
Well, what if at some point, heaven forbid, we get to an impasse where the superintendent is not inviting senior staff and we do wanna consult we as a board wanna consult a senior staff member, ask a question at an agenda setting meeting.
That's not our job, Rachel.
But,
We don't consult the senior staff, the superintendent does, they work for them.
okay, I don't know if you understand what I'm saying though. If we're bringing forth something to an agenda setting meeting and we're not able to get something done, alright, I'll stop. I think we should just move on.
yeah, that's good.
Can we
Gonna
address,
agree on this, so.
can we address the language in red? I think there's two issues that are getting interchanged. Is when is a draft gonna be available with documentation, and when is a draft gonna be available without documentation, okay? So what I'd like to deal with first is how quickly will the draft under revision control, without documents attached, be available to board members after the agenda setting meeting?
It can go out the next day, like it goes out to senior staff the next day.
Hmm?
It can go out the next day, like with senior staff. I mean, it goes out to senior staff the next day, it can go to the board members the next day the same
What's
as
good-
revision number 1.
Yeah, what's good for the goose, you know? All right, so how about if we put, let's cross out this red and rewrite the thing, okay?
Which, are you talking about A or the AB red?
The board's executive assistant shall provide the draft board agendas to board members and DSC senior staff members not later than the day, end of the day following the agenda setting meeting. The draft agenda will be under revision control. Now that's separate and distinct from the question of when our documents do go on, okay? And I think the revision control, which has been talked about for a couple of years now, will solve the problem of, are we looking at the latest and greatest draft?
Just for so we're saying the executive assistant shall provide the draft board agenda to board members and to senior staff no later than the end of the day after agenda setting.
Right.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay, so now we go to C, which is now D. I'd like to hear from Dr. Watts, what do you think is working and not working about requesting agenda items right now?
It's very haphazard, honestly.
Hmm?
It's very haphazard.
Yeah.
The problem is, you know, anybody can submit anything at any time, and it's honestly really hard to keep track of that. You know, this here says that it has to be, you know, basically you don't wanna have something on the agenda that's only one person's interest. But I have not required it to be, seconded or, you know, another person say, oh, I want that on the agenda. If it's appropriate, that's fine. So I don't know, it would be better if there was some way to, I was trying to think what would be a better way. It's just, you know, you can submit one thing or you can submit 5 things, somebody else doesn't submit any. I mean, it's very, I don't know, there has to be a better way, is what I was thinking.
I agree that there has to be a better way. I would not wanna penalize the person who submits multiple items because of the fact that other people aren't submitting.
Right.
Right.
It's quite possible, I think, to state, and I'm not sure the language, I'm thinking out loud, okay, that request for agenda items should be received by the officers generally prior to the agenda setting meeting, okay, for starters.
Yeah, 'cause that's definitely not happening. That's another big reason why.
That's right,
So
well,
many
people
things
have to
happen.
think ahead.
Yeah, it's like,
People have to
add
think
this to
ahead.
Tuesday, there's room there. Well,
Yeah, so you could define a request after the agenda setting meeting could be defined as an exception to the rule. And to qualify as an exception to the rule, it would have to be on an issue that is time sensitive and has come up since the agenda setting meeting.
No way.
In other words, if someone is rummaging around in their head about an issue and they don't get it into the agenda setting meeting, they can't disrupt the whole process. But if an emergency happens on a Wednesday and the agenda setting meeting has been Monday, I think we need the flexibility for all members to at least request that room be made for it in the agenda. What has always concerned me is that in the past, not with our current lineup of officers, but in the past, some of them were placing very qualitative judgments on whether something was of interest or relevance, you know? And I think that, the idea of seconding the issues is really, you can end up marginalizing people.
Well, thank you for the compliment, because that's exactly my thoughts, and that's exactly, did you hear what I just said before this? 'Cause that's exactly, I've not required anybody to second it.
Yeah.
I think it was appropriate, you know, material for, within our domain, it should be on there. whether it comes from one person or
Yeah.
5 people. It
That's right,
shouldn't
if
matter.
we respect each other's point of view, we
Right.
gotta respect what they wanna talk about at a meeting. You know, as long as people understand that, number one, you get it on the agenda or you can't talk about it at the meeting. That's rule number one. And number two, that there's a difference between a board discussion item and a board business item. You know, cause we've had stuff slip through the cracks before where,
that's all
speeches became board business items, you know.
Now, that's out of order right there, John. You seem like you're talking about two different things, like, as you told me about 20 minutes ago. Like you are off topic, but you can continue.
Well, we have to stay within the bounds of parliamentary procedure. David?
I can fill in some history on this. Prior to this, it was somewhat restricted. 3 board members had to request it, but it had to be in at a certain time. It was, and so the thrust was to keep it as orderly as possible. That did not work well, because there were board members that got marginalized, and so it was changed to be as open as possible, with the understanding that the officers could say, you got this in too late, it's gonna have to go on the next agenda, as the safety valve.
So you,
And the requester has to be notified. Those were the 3 key parts, as open as possible, anybody could request whatever they wanted. It could get scheduled whenever it was convenient, and the requester had to be notified, because that last piece was not happening. So those were the 3 key points that this tried to address.
Absolutely. I think an agenda item is not necessarily a request for an agenda item at the next meeting. And I believe that if we have written into the policy somewhere that requests for agenda items are acknowledged right when they're made, then it doesn't seem like they're going into a black hole and you don't hear anything about them. So myself, I'd be more than happy if I make a request and say, man, we can't do it for the next 2 meetings, but the 3rd meeting, you'll have it on there.
Well, that's it,
fine.
that wording is
That's
already
it.
in.
That's in this
Yeah.
thing.
When necessary.
Yeah.
John.
So I think the only thing that I was a little bit concerned about when I read it, because I do agree that we need to leave it open so that people feel comfortable making their requests, it says that requests need to be made to the officers. And then it discussed other board members who wish to indicate their support for discussion of the items to do so via email to the officers. That almost, in a roundabout way, encourages someone who's asking for something to be included to petition others to send an email to gain support in that case, and I don't think that that's a good practice that we should encourage. So I think that needs to be somehow addressed. I know when I've made, submissions to be included, it wasn't, required to have support, so I definitely don't take that practice. I don't contact people and say, hey, support my stuff, that's not right. So I think that we should maybe think about that.
Yeah, you're right. I think I'll make a quick comment on that, and then David, and then Dr. Watts, okay? I think you're absolutely right. When I used to have to teach compliance with the Massachusetts open meeting law, which they're all modeled after the federal law anyway, there's very, very little difference between the states. And the subject always came up, you lobbying for votes from members. What we used to tell boards was, you can ask any board member anytime what they think about an issue. Stop short of asking them to vote a certain way. And when you ask somebody to second you're actually asking for a vote. If you have to call them up and say, hey, I want this on the agenda, will you support it?
I mean, it's worded though, not specifically for support for the item, but more support for discussion of the item, which I think is just, good manners. If someone wants to bring up something, yeah, we should discuss it. But I just think that we need to be careful with how that might be construed by others, and especially if it's in our policy.
So, David,
Just gonna point out, that if the email is sent to the officers, none of the other members can support it, cause they don't know about
Right,
it.
so that,
You're
that's,
gonna have to-
so
you're
they
gonna
have to ask for it,
You're gonna have
so,
you have to say the whole board
right,
gets copied, to the officers, copying the whole board,
right.
or else nobody's gonna support it, they won't know about it.
What has been happening though is, it has been copied to the whole board most of the time, and then someone would get on and say, I support that being on the agenda from, you know, whatever.
And to be,
But I also understand her point, that what we were trying to get away from is what we might get right back into in a roundabout way.
So have we got to the point where we can take out the following? Other board members who wish to indicate their support for discussion of the item should do so, because we're saying that's not necessary, right? Then the next sentence is, should no other board members contact the board officers regarding the item, the officers will determine if the item is sufficient interest to the board, and I think that's, Dr. Watts, what you were arguing against.
Or you
Right.
could just say that right, so we don't strike all the, starting with other board members who wish to,
Mm-hmm.
blah, blah, blah. Should no other board members, that can all be stricken.
I think it could be
And just, you could say the officers will determine if the item, because you could do it that way.
well,
Yeah.
I don't,
No.
I don't
No.
think that the board officer should be required to determine if an item is of sufficient interest to the board, because
Thank you,
that opens
yeah.
up a can of worms.
yeah, exactly, I don't wanna be in that position.
Well, you could say,
I think just the language, sufficient interest, that makes it, it's very discretionary then to the board officers if they, you know,
or you could say within the board's domain, you could say the officers will determine if the item
Yeah,
is
but
within
something
the
that's
board's
not-
domain, as opposed to, right, sufficient interest is.
Yeah, cause David, I'm sure that you'll back me up, without naming any names, we did have an officer whose famous last words were, what do they wanna talk about that for, right? That's what we shouldn't be hearing during an agenda setting meeting. If a member wants to talk about it, we're all equal.
Right, this boiled up when the membership was, some of the members were disappointed with the leadership, who were very restricted. That's what generated all of this.
Yeah,
Trying to find some place where everyone could be heard.
yeah, and that's what I mean by qualitative judgment, when someone else gets to determine whether somebody else's interest is sufficient.
Right.
So can we take that out?
the sufficient interest language.
Hmm.
The sufficient interest language,
Yeah.
you mean, yeah, so what should we change, the officers will determine if the item.
I said,
It's agenda worthy.
is within the domain of the.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
I think we said something up here, well, I'm trying to,
How about the officers will determine if the item is within the purview of the board and determine the meeting that the item will be placed on an agenda.
yeah, it says
Says to
included
the
on a
board.
future agenda,
Right.
so, like, if it can't be placed on one, it can go to another.
Right.
Officers will determine if the item is purviewed of the board.
Within the purview of the board, I think that's better.
Alright, but, moving forward with some of these things, I just wanna say, let's just be careful that we have to modify everything, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because I mean, and then saying that, I just think that, to be honest with you, the way how we've currently been, operating as in sending stuff to get on the agenda, I don't think that there's been a problem with that, to my knowledge, to my recollection as an officer. I think that we hadn't done, that everything that's pretty much been wanting to be on the agenda that I know of, we hadn't had any kickback unless it's been done with someone else. So I just think that we're getting too personal, and some of these wording has been because of the prior officers and the prior board members coming on here. I think that sometimes we can get too personal and make things more rigorous than what they need to be. So I mean, I just wanna make that note moving forward, we might wanna, if it ain't broke, we might not wanna fix it. Unless they be worried, as Rachel just said, about, officers, about people basically asking for votes or asking for opinions on something that has been sent up. Because heck, you could send something to the officers, and all three officers might don't like topic, and you could say, well, we ain't got it. So the same way as you send to the officers, I know on certain things, they CC everyone on the board, And I think that's a good thing, so that everyone on board can know that it was submitted up there. So even if I'm thinking about sending it and you already sent that same topic, then we all on the same page. That's all I got to say.
This
So the
is-
problem with, is that a lot of times somebody will submit a agenda request after the Monday agenda setting meeting and specifically request, I want this topic on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Very often they tell me where they want it. But, and it can't always be accommodated, so, and so, you know, acknowledging, receipt of these, requests, that's personally why I haven't acknowledged back receipt, because we don't know yet where it's gonna go. It's not that we're ignoring it, we're just trying to, you know, figure out what's best, and we don't know right when I get it, or we get it,
Right,
where
right.
it's gonna be.
Now, how about if we have some language that says, requests received after the agenda setting meeting
No,
will be,
no.
supported as time is available on future agendas, whether it's the current one or not.
But still, you may get, they may all be before the agenda setting meeting, and you may not necessarily be able to put them all on the agenda, that's the thing too, you know, I mean, there has to be some flexibility to it. I mean, it's preferable.
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying that if you ask before the agenda session, it automatically gets on there. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm just saying though, is that your odds diminish on getting it on the next agenda if you ask after the agenda setting meeting.
Plus you're making, once again, you know, draft, you've asked to add this, if you're making it, we're asking Robin to, you know, have the first draft come out 24 hours, we're asking the documents on Thursday. It's getting much, you know, you're just gonna have more drafts, so I just think there should be just a general policy that, you know, that you submit your agenda requests, prior to the agenda setting meeting. That seems to make sense, and that doesn't mean it's gonna be on there, but.
But as long as we realize there are exceptions to every rule, and if a person can supply justification as to why they believe it should be on an emergency basis added to the very next agenda. No justification, well, then you're left up to your discretion. It's fairly simple, you know.
I mean, what would constitute an emergency though? I mean, can't you
Right.
just do it at a special
Yeah,
call or an
yeah.
emergency meeting?
Yeah,
I mean, we
that's-
have protocol
that's
for
okay.
that, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, then you get into the whole defining what's considered an emergency in that aspect, so. But when we're talking about receipt, are we talking about acknowledging this receipt, like, hey, I got your email? Or are we talking about receipt with regard to specifically putting it where they want it?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
So, because I think that a receipt of, you know, the officers acknowledging, okay, I got your email, we're looking into it, that's perfectly acceptable, but trying to honor someone's request for a specific date, that's,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's almost all of them have, I
Yeah.
want it here.
yeah,
Yeah.
so,
Isn't that the basic protocol anyway, in terms of how we set the agenda?
Right.
The agenda setting meeting, how do we set the agenda? Who determines what's on there?
The officers and the superintendent.
All right, therefore, in my mind, if something comes up after that agenda setting meeting, then it would still be the officers who would determine whether it is worthy or not. That's in my mind.
Worthy enough to get on the next agenda?
Worthy or not for
Or
any,
at all.
whatever. Worthy or not for whatever. They've set their, what would be the agenda, and they feel like, hey, the officers feel like, hey, this is more important than anything we have on the agenda. Bang. Well, the officers say, this is not that important, let's push it back. Bang, but yeah, the only thing I say officers, because I don't want the onus of, you know, the clout to go on. When she makes a decision and bounces back, and then it's a personal thing. You're bouncing all of mine back, and, you know, but at the point, the officers have already authenticated the agenda. That's the way I look at it, I don't know.
I think things added after the agenda setting meeting, it opens up a Pandora's box of notice and putting onus onto chair people and officers and the superintendent maybe not being involved in that process of adding them. So I don't think that, I think that it should, all of those things should be considered, and it would almost require a completely different subpart to this, to talk about revisions to the agenda setting. I think that we should keep it, I think that we should have a strict way of how we get things put forth on the agenda. Or at least with regard to adding things after. There has to be some type of requirement and decorum required for getting things onto the agenda.
After the agenda's been set.
After the
After the agenda's been set, correct?
No, I'm saying like in general, if we leave it open to saying, okay, yeah, you can have an emergency, well then what constitutes an emergency? What notice is required? And then, you know, who's going to sign off on adding things after the agenda has already been set?
That's something I think that the officer the officer should have that conversation. No, nothing should be ever added to the agenda, once the actual agenda is set. Nothing should be added to the agenda unless the three officers have a conversation. I'm not even saying the officers and the superintendent. If the superintendent calls someone to have a conversation, then once again, then the officers need to agree to say, hey, look, okay, we're gonna go ahead and put this on the agenda. Not the superintendent goes to the secretary, or not the superintendent calls the chair and say, hey, this needs to be added because no, it needs to be a conversation among the three officers and say, hey, this is what's happening, this is why we're adding to the agenda. That's the policy.
Right,
That's what it should be.
What I'm getting at is that then you require notice. You have three officers having a conversation about an item going on agenda, and then you have requirements of notice to the public.
At that point in time, the agenda's already been set, so you're making a modification to the agenda that you've already set.
If three officers get on the phone and
Right.
talk about something, you've convened a meeting, and you have to
Yes.
publish it, post it, and have it public.
Well, that's the case, then don't change the agenda. Unless it's emergency, that's the case, then you have an emergency meeting. That's the case.
what I'm
Be
getting at,
simple.
basically.
Be
Is that
simple, that's it.
it's too much of hand worms to try to define.
I think what we're trying to
think
strike
we're all on
is
the
a
same
balance
page now.
here. I think it's just a balance that we're trying not to make it too restrictive,
Exactly.
but not have it so that the whole thing is a mess
Right.
until Friday before the meeting, okay? So how about if we have agenda requests should be received prior to the agenda setting meeting. After the agenda setting meeting, requests will be added. If a request is made after the agenda setting meeting for that meeting, it will be added only at the discretion of the chair. Unless you wanna have a meeting of all three.
No, I don't.
You have a time, you have
Yes,
a time
yes,
constraint
David.
too.
That's not practical,
Yeah.
all meeting again.
So you're gonna have the same rules apply to the superintendent and staff, right?
Yeah.
Board members, if anything, should have more leeway than the superintendent and senior staff.
Exactly.
Right.
So you gotta be careful that, cause now I'm just talking about reality. Now, as you say, senior staff says, oh, you forgot this. So just gotta make sure that board members have, more leeway, or that if you put something in restrictive, it's restrictive on everybody. And the board officers will tell the superintendent, I'm sorry, you can't have that.
And the discipline is everybody thinks ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, yeah, that would be refreshing. I'm not sure it's
Well, then
recognized.
just
So,
that,
you know,
brings up a good point.
one thing that might be helpful is just have, just a general addition here about, the way to submit a agenda request without getting too restrictive, like, you know, preferably, we'd like, you know, agenda request before the agenda setting meeting. And also, if maybe the person submitting the request would put what meeting is their preference for their topic to be on, like whether it's work session, committee. I really think that would be helpful. Now, it's not that all that can be honored every time, but just, you know, I just think, you know, if it was a preference or something like that.
And you have a statement, all all attempts will be made to honor requests, but you can't do it, so you're not committed to honoring them. But you are committed to consider it, that's fine, because it leaves the
Cause then
authority
you
with the
decide whether
others.
it's a committee
But
or,
it doesn't
you know,
leave the person feeling left out.
right, whether it's a work session or whether it's I'd like it at the meeting in June or, you know, whatever it is.
It does, well, yeah, it does talk about,
It's-
once it says that in the last few sentences, I think, you know, about timing of the receipt of the request, where the officers believe the appropriate venue for the topic, length of time, blah, blah, blah. And then talks about, once that's been made, the officers will notify that board member. So, that's kind of there, but not necessarily all of what you mentioned. And it does talk about, you know, disposing items to board committee, board work session, and regular board meeting, so.
Once again, I think we are getting too personal. I think once you've made this, once you've sent a request and say, hey, look, I've seen certain things where people have said, look, I don't mind if we go to work session or not. And if there's on the agenda, and they said we can move, they would want it to go to a work session, they can say, hey, look here, I wanna table this to a work session. And after that, we move on. I mean, I just think that we're getting too deep, we're getting too caught up and too emotional about detail. I think we're getting too analytical. We're starting looking and we're trying to fix everything. That's just too, I think that's a little too much.
I understand what you're saying, but you weren't at our first meeting, and we discussed that one of our basic precepts is that a policy that leaves room for interpretation is a lousy policy. So it has to be clear, it has to account for different scenarios that can come up in its enforcement.
Right, and I think right now, I'm going off of, over the last 3 months, I have not seen where, what we have is a problem, because I've seen where people make requests, and I see where we go to meetings, and we talk about them, and most of the time, we put people on the agenda. Now for the latecomers, to be honest, as a board officer, I say it publicly, when you send something late, and you said that you want to go in there, if you don't call me personally, listen, I read it, but I will mention it at the next meeting if it does not have merit of being an emergency. Because, I mean, I don't need to go back and forth with you. I'm sure we all professionals here, and we all know that the policies and procedures are already there. So that you already know that it's gonna get put on the next agenda. I mean, that's just that's common sense. I think that we have people who get pushy sometimes, and y'all don't burn up my line, y'all burn up Dr. Guard's line probably with that foolishness about, I want to get done, I want to get done. No. If it's an emergency, then we will all know it's an emergency, or that it needs to be pushed on to the next agenda. That's just that's my way of thinking.
Yes, very true.
I just wanna touch on that for a second. I just wanna say that the policies are put in place not necessarily for the people that are in our seats right now, but for efficiency for the long term. So what might be working right now, but clearly, obviously, the protocol and policies that are in place right now are not 100% being worked through, from what Dr. Watts said and what some other officers and board members have said. So the policies are in place to make sure that we operate efficiently for the long term, not just right now.
And but we can revisit them at any point in time. These policies can be revisited at regular board meetings as well. These policies can be changed at regular board meetings. That's why
But they shouldn't be.
But,
They shouldn't be, unless it's something egregious and that really needs to be changed. Policy should be in place for long term unless something happens or circumstances change that require a substantial revision. I don't think that we should make it a practice to be doing that.
Right.
Personally.
I would support a periodic relevancy check
Yeah,
to see that.
you always should
you know,
review policies
but,
to make sure that they're working right for you, but.
Right, and the other thing that gets lost sometimes as we're thinking about this is that you never write a policy because of the individuals that are in the position. You write a policy that guides the execution of the position. You know?
sometimes we can guide ourselves right out the river and drown. Sometimes we can drive out, we can guide ourselves right out the river and drown.
I get what you're saying.
Let's get back to this.
Sure.
Yeah,
I mean, the way that's written, I mean, I have to go back to my point about the officers making the decision. The way this is written, the officers will make the decision. Now, you said they can't convene a meeting, but somehow they have to make the decision where this is written.
You mean,
Okay,
Yeah, where this D, the new D, is written, says the officers will make the decision.
well, isn't that covered under the, because we added B regarding the notice of the agenda setting meeting.
Yeah.
So it's-
So it's
C is now-
addition, yeah, I'm talking about the addition,
Yeah. Oh, we're
Okay.
talking about the additional.
the addition of something to the agenda.
all right, so reset. Let's see where we are. Every board member may request a topic or matter to be included on a future board agenda if that matter falls under the purview of the board. This request should be made via email to the officers
Period.
and
Period.
prior to the agenda setting session.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, shoot. I should have known better. Oh, thanks. And prior to the agenda setting, okay. Now, other board members who wish to indicate, that goes away.
Right.
Should no other board member contact the,
That
That
goes
goes
away.
That goes away.
okay? Then officers will determine if the item is
Within the
within
purview
the
of the.
board's
We already said the
purview
purview above
to be
that.
included on a future agenda.
Yeah, it is, that is redundant.
Yeah.
That
All
leaves it
that's
wide
redundant.
open as
Yes.
to which meeting you wanna put it in.
Yeah, but that's
Yeah,
redundant to
it's
the
already
first
got
sentence.
the
Huh?
Yeah,
first
the
sentence.
first
First
sentence
sentence,
kinda
first
talks
sentence.
about
This
it.
sentence is official.
So we can
Yeah.
just strike that whole sentence through, in
Okay.
my opinion.
All right,
So we're striking the officers will determine the item, we're taking
Right.
that out too,
Yes,
okay?
ma'am.
now, I think the next sentence is very good.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
board officers will determine the appropriate board agenda for each matter, whether it be board committee, board work session, or regular board meeting.
Yeah.
I think that's
That's-
perfectly reasonable to ask the officers to do that.
Or you can say a special call meeting too. I don't know if you want to list all
Yeah.
those.
Robin,
Are we keeping in where it says to be included on a future agenda? Because when you're striking, the officers will be determined with the purview, we said that was
no,
above.
that's gone, that whole
Right.
sentence.
John,
What-
because that next
The
sentence
first
includes
sentence
that.
covers
But-
all of that.
But then where do we say to include it on a future agenda?
On the
Starts off
first, the
with
first
that.
sentence, I
Okay.
think, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's already there.
Yeah.
Okay, I said on a future agenda, got it.
Okay, so are we okay on,
Yep.
having it, the traffic direction of,
Yeah.
whether it should be going to committee? I mean, that's the whole reason for having committees, is that we offload as much possible to them.
We may be able to get rid of the additional things being added after agenda setting by
Oh,
adding in what Dr.
okay.
Watts mentioned about emergency.
Or
Well,
special
okay,
call.
yeah.
Because
all right,
if
let's-
it's a
let's
true
go back.
emergency, then we can do a special
Okay.
call or emergency
So
meeting.
let's go
so-
back to, this request should be made by, via email to the offices and prior to the agenda setting meeting,
Uh-huh.
okay?
Mhm.
If a request is made subsequent to the agenda setting meeting.
Oh, no, I was saying add it right here.
Way up that, way down there where it says
Where it
board
says, where
work.
it talks about board committee, board work session, or regular board meeting, we
Yeah.
can just add in, comma,
Special
special call
call
or emergency.
Oh,
meeting.
okay, I'm
It kinda
sorry, I
takes
was,
care
I
of
was on a different plane, okay.
Because it's basically saying the board officers will determine at the, you know, at that time where different things go.
At the agenda setting meeting, which, yeah.
And if they get something that's an emergency, then.
The timing of the receipt of the request combined with the appropriate venue for the topic and the length of time necessary to gather supporting information when necessary will determine when the item appears on a future agenda. That's kind of,
Yeah, that's obvious enough.
Motherhood and
Yeah,
outside.
yeah, I don't think, yeah.
it's another phrase, but I don't wanna say it
Right,
with the
yeah.
tape recorder on.
So scratch
So we're
that.
scratch,
Yeah,
Because you've already covered that.
hopefully they're gonna use that judgment in determining.
Exactly.
Okay, and then how about once a determination of the request has been made, the officers will notify the board member of the plan for addressing the topic or matter requested. Okay? I don't understand the next
Last
sentence at all. This
It
does not apply to items previously
know?
disposed by the board.
Oh,
David?
I know exactly why it's in there.
Okay, why is it in there?
Because board members used to try to recycle closed items. The vote had been taken, it was done, they wanted it on the agenda again.
Well, we did that, we did that in January.
We did.
right? When
No,
we
that's-
said
No,
that
it
the
wasn't the
8%
same
vote-
thing,
Wasn't the
right?
same.
Why was
Wasn't the
that?
same
No.
thing.
Why was that?
And there's a rule that covers
One at a
Robert's
time,
rules.
one at a time.
That was a
Yeah.
Robert's
Tell me, why
rules.
was that different?
That was a Robert's Rules exception that you can, call for a recount. It's in Robert's
Okay.
Rules.
But let's put a time limit on it. If something was passed 10 years ago, and you wanna, it could be considered disposed by the board, and you can't say that because it was passed 10 years ago, we can't change it.
Well, it
That's
would
not
be
the
different,
same thing,
yeah, it's different if we have a
It's
new
way-
city board.
way different, yeah.
Sitting board, sitting superintendent, sitting everything.
How about, if this does not apply to boards previous, to items previously disposed of by the board, and then name a time frame?
No.
No,
Because
what
I
I,
things
mean,
change.
that there
I mean,
speaks,
things
I
do
think
change,
that's
yeah.
fine.
I think you don't
If
even
it was
need
I don't
that.
think we don't
disposed.
need the sentence, because under Robert's rules and policies of the board, I mean, like, you can't
Right.
rehash stuff, I mean, if it's
Right.
against,
Right. And
I don't
then-
think it needs to be codified there.
Right, to his point, it can be rehashed if you're on the positive side. If it was approved and you wanna rehatch it, you can rehatch it. But if it's been disposed, we voted it down, you can't bring it back. If you
I
voted
think
it up
You get
and you
into,
voted on the side of up, you can bring it back.
yeah, you get
Yeah.
into like issues of,
I mean,
if
that's
you
Robert's
keep that in
rules.
there, you get into issues of having to, you know, say, has there been a substantial modification to the matter, or what has changed, why did, you know, how is this different? So if someone wants to truly bring something forward,
Sure they can.
that, you know, circumstances have changed, then that's a completely new agenda item. You
Yeah.
can't bring something that's already been voted on.
Well, Robert's rules gives two avenues to make a change. One is to rescind, and the other two is reconsider.
Reconsider.
Okay? So I think rescinding, which be what Mel's talking about, is if something that was passed, something that didn't fly the first time. That's to say, if there's a change in the composition of a board, that you can't bring it up again? Let's say the board made a decision last Saturday that you don't like. You don't wanna have the freedom to be able to bring it up to the board again?
Well, that's what I'm saying, but this doesn't say, this sentence does not
So
answer
you
that.
can't, yeah.
This sentence, it talks about the board, which board? So you'd have to get it, if we're gonna leave that sentence, then we actually need to expand upon it and make it clear about who can, you know, if we're gonna say previously disposed of things, how does that apply?
It's quite common in legislative bodies that if something fails because it didn't have votes, if enough people change their mind and you got the votes, you bring it up.
Usually they change it to
Oh,
to
yeah.
make those, to get those other votes though, usually there's a
They don't.
change to,
Okay, how big a change does it have to be?
exactly. That's what I'm saying, you're gonna have to change that sentence to
Yeah.
make it fit.
I'm just leery of the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't like it.
I would say get rid of it. I think you wanna be less restrictive. I mean, that's the whole idea of a body like this, is have the ability to be fluid and things change, and you know, what was good 5 years ago may not be good now. I mean,
Right.
so that's the problem.
I would
I
agree
got
with
you.
striking it.
Yeah, but I'd like to do that, I'll try to clarify.
Alright, is there anything we can dispose of in 1 minute?
So are we striking this too?
I wanna
Am I
clarify,
striking?
Huh?
in this case,
Yeah.
what board means. Board, I think every item is written for the current board, regardless of that policy might be in effect 10 years from now or 10 years ago. This is current board they're talking about for everything. So when they're talking about whether the item was disposed of by the board, they mean this board, not the board 10 years.
But it's open to interpretation though, Mel.
Yeah.
No,
That's the
that's,
thing.
that's
How many,
what-
how many people have to change
Look at the
before it's
first
a new
article
board?
we read, but I mean, this is for this board,
So, are we striking that sentence or not?
right?
It would be it'd be easier if we had sessions. And then you can say anything that was passed or defeated in the last
Yeah,
session cannot
session.
be changed.
Yeah.
But we don't have anything like that, you know, so I agree with you, let's just take it out and deal with it on a case-by-case basis,
And
and
can I also
eventually
say
we'll
this-
establish a precedent.
The sentence before, once that determination has been made, the officers will notify the board member of the plan for addressing that. But a lot of times, that's gonna be redundant, like a lot of times you're gonna see, we met at the agenda setting meeting, agenda comes out 24 hours later, you see it on there, so if this is kind of making more work, I think. I don't think then,
Should we, well, what about an acknowledgement of receipt of the person's email?
Well,
Well,
the only thing I'm
Is that
thinking
so?
of is, what if the decision is it's gonna be addressed 4 agendas from now?
well, we might not know that after the agenda setting meeting.
I don't follow.
Well, like, so if somebody, yeah, we determine we already have too much on the current agenda, even though the request arrived before the agenda setting meeting, you know, it's gonna be addressed, but we may not know, is it gonna be on the next agenda? Probably, but, I mean, that's not gonna be determined till 2 weeks from then, yeah.
We don't have I don't think we have in Outlook the, ability to see if somebody read the email, so I'm just looking for an acknowledgement, received, one word.
And then take this out,
Yes, David.
that might be better.
The point of this was to more than just receive. The point was that officers were obligated to get back to that member and tell them what their thinking was. If their thinking was, it can't go on this agenda, we'll consider it next time. Just tell them
That's respectable.
that
Yeah, that's
you
fine.
thought about it,
That's
and this is
respectable.
what your thought was. We can't seem to fit it on this one, might go on work session, might go on the next agenda, and then when you do decide, you send them another email.
Okay.
Just so they don't feel like you're ignoring
No,
it,
no.
was the whole
Right,
point.
then the thing is though, I don't think you need to write to somebody where you put it on the agenda either, cause they're gonna see it, they're gonna get the, you know,
You know, it just seemed like a closure thing, you know?
yeah.
Yeah, I can.
Because if you just say received, that this doesn't have as much meat to it as, we got it, we talked about it, we can't fit it on this agenda.
Right, at least they have some type of understanding.
Last question for me tonight is, with the volume of agenda requests we have, how much of a task is that really for the secretary to acknowledge the requests? What, 5, 6, 7, every 2 weeks?
Well, actually, you said for the officers to address? Because that's, you sent to the secretary, you sent them to the officers. Is that what you're asking, John?
No, I'm asking, are we making a mountain out of a molehill? There's probably no more than 10 agenda requests for any given meeting. So we should be able to handle it and not consider it an oppressive workload.
Duly noted.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I just wanna make one question, because when we were talking about the revisions being noted, or Robin, we were talking about, you making revisions and noting the revisions. We didn't necessarily put any language to that, so I didn't know if we wanted to put language to that. And then also I was gonna ask if it would be easier if you just did like a track changes on the document. I don't know if that's possible, so that people can see, okay, this is what changed, as opposed to having to
Yeah.
take 1 and 2 and.
Oh, you mean, you mean on the
On Word.
on the agenda? Like instead of saying revision 1, revision 2?
Yeah,
Put a track change on that?
yeah. I don't know if that would be easier for people to read.
I don't know, because some people can't see the red or the changes
that's
on
fine.
their computer, so.
That's why I asked, if
Yeah.
we have that issue
So I
today.
think, I would it was probably easier just to say revision 1, 2, and 3.
I'll tell you what, this is a very important policy, so let's adjourn, but leave that item open, and we'll open up with it next Monday night to see if anybody has any further thoughts on it, and then we'll make a decision. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you all very much.
That's all,